All right, Erin, you got the recording?
All good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us virtually today, everyone, for our May coffee and conversation due to the May blizzard, which was crazy. But we're going to talk about pre-award today. So we'll go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'll just go over kind of an introduction of the topic and some definitions, and then we'll talk about the Cayenne process. And then Sarah and Erin will go into some deeper dives on specific topics, and we will end with resources and some of the fiscal team's goals for the future. Next slide. Okay, so just starting with a few definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. So routing is the process of submitting a proposal through InfoEd for review. And then this also gives you what's called a routing number. And this is a number that we as the fiscal team use a lot. And you might notice that that's also the number that is in the fiscal folder next to your project. So this is an important number that helps us kind of track the proposal as it goes through this routing process. And then a NOFO or a NOFA is the Notice of Funding Opportunity or Announcement. And this is an official federal grant announcement, which outlines the program purpose, eligibility, deadlines, and application instructions for an award. An FOA is an old term that's not really used anymore, but we did just include it here for reference. Alternatively, you might see what's called a request for proposal or an RFP, which is a solicitation for contracts or cooperative agreements. And then this is more specific to one project. So typically an RFP would be listed by like a foundation or a state agency instead of a NOFO. And then a subcontract is when money is flowing out to an external source, when funds are coming in from another source. So for example, if we have an award from NIH directly, and then we subcontract out a portion of the work to another institution, that would be a subcontract. And then cost share is when we would have to contribute resources to a sponsored project beyond what is funded by the sponsor. So this might be in-kind support through time, or maybe sharing of space or equipment or things like that. It's not very common, but it does come up sometimes. And then the last definition is a multi-project application. This is a single submission with multiple interrelated components that share that common focus. So these will have NIH grant codes like P1, P30, P50, or U54, for example. And then moving to the right side of the screen, there are kind of two different ways that proposals might get submitted. So if it is an NIH proposal and we are the parent organization, the parent recipient, that would be submitted by OGC. And then the ones that Cayenne will submit is if we are a subcontract or if it's a non-NIH grant. So a foundation or maybe a state agency grant, we would be the ones to actually submit that. And we'll kind of get into more detail on that on the following slides. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so getting into our process a bit here. So I'll just go really high level into our processes, and then Sarah and Erin again are gonna dive deeper into these. And this is really not necessarily how everything works right in this moment, but this is more of the process that we are hoping to move towards. So we as the fiscal team can better support the larger team. So many of these steps are either new or in progress, but again, this is kind of the direction that we're hoping to go. So at the very beginning, when the NOFO is released, this is when the PI is going to talk to their PO really extensively and really figure out if this opportunity is a good fit for Cayenne and what is desired from the application, to get a good sense of our, how well we might do in the application process. So after that, those conversations are happening. Then the PI would fill out what's currently in FormStack, but will soon be in Smartsheet, fill out a form that goes to Cayenne Fiscal, so then we can start working together to backwards plan for the submission timeline. And then you will, as the PI, will build your team. So start to figure out who needs to be on your team, who's going to be responsible for completing which tasks. And then you're going to build out more details of your plan. So will you have subcontracts? What do your research components look like? What is your budget going to look like? Really getting into some of the details there. And then once you have those details figured out, you will route and revise your proposal. So you'll enter the information into the sponsors portal and work a lot behind the scenes to review everything, revise it internally, check for errors, make sure that the formatting and all the required documents are in place. And then once you have that draft ready to go, then you will submit that back typically to Cayenne Fiscal, who will then route it through InfoEd for OGC's review. I say typically, this isn't always exactly how it goes, but this is most common. And then OGC will do their review to make sure that all the numbers look good. We have all the required elements that they are looking for in the proposal, and then they will give us back their edits. We will all work to incorporate them and then finally submit everything to the sponsor. Again, this could be OGC or Cayenne team. It just depends on the type of proposal. So that's really high level kind of the plan. And then now we're getting into the roles a little bit here. So this scientist icon is supposed to be the PI. So the PI is really going to be involved in all aspects of this process. And then we see the little icon with the headset. That might be the project manager or the program manager. And these are areas making the plan, building out the plan, making sure everyone's at the table and the project is getting completed on time. This might be an opportunity to delegate those tasks to the program manager. And then the third line below with the money icon is where the fiscal team might take more of a lead. So obviously at the very beginning, you're going to let us know that the NOFO was released, and then we can be involved in the budgeting or submission processes. So again, this is not how it always works or has to work, but this is just a common situation of how we might all work together to get these applications submitted. So this is why it's really important to meet with us and establish your team to make sure everyone is really clear on what they're supposed to be doing. So with that, I will pass it over to Erin to get into some more of the details.
Thanks, McKenna. So let's start at step one, looking for funding. As many of you probably know, the Anschutz Office of Research, Development, and Strategy has really great resources for finding funding and supporting grant writing. The screenshots here on the right are from their website, and they show you kind of the mechanism where you can find open funding opportunities and look for anticipated funding opportunities as well. The bottom screenshot really highlights some of the grant writing support that they offer, which is great. If you haven't checked that out, definitely recommend checking out that website. And this website is listed on our resources. So when you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to access that easily. You can always look at grants.gov too, which I'm sure many of you do, and sign up for funding alerts to identify funding that would align with your interests and skills. When you do identify a funding opportunity that you're interested in, it's really important to reach out to the program official early in the process to determine if the program that you're interested in aligns with your team's skills and strengths. And the program official might recommend other places where you could seek funding that might better align with your team, or give you some hints about how to set up a really strong proposal for the selected funding opportunity. Next slide, please. The next step in the process is a new step for us. As McKenna said, this is an expanding process that we're working on. This is a Smartsheet form that we are rolling out starting July 1st as part of our larger shift from FormStack to Smartsheet. And so this is the funding submit a proposal form. So you navigate here when you're planning to submit a proposal. The form asks you to select where you are in the planning process to offer tailored support and guidance from the team. So you could select, I'm ready to get started. I have the key components to the proposal, and I've already routed the proposal in InfoHead, and I'm ready for Cayenne to review. You can see that that top choice, I'm ready to get started, is highlighted in red. The reason for that is because it's Cayenne Fiscal Team's hope that we would be involved at this point in the process. So very early on at the beginning of it, as many proposals as possible. So please reach out early so we can provide you with support and tools to make the process smooth as possible and hopefully strengthen your proposal. However, you may choose not to engage the fiscal team in the planning process. So minimally, we would need to be involved before it's sent to OGC for review, which we're going to get into here shortly. The Smartsheet proposal form also helps you assemble a team for your grant proposal if you get in touch with us early. We always recommend that proposals have a project manager or a team leader to provide clarity on responsibilities and timelines and ensure all those requirements of the opportunity are met for the proposal. The person who functions as the project manager or team lead tracks proposal requirements, timelines, and writing assignments. They also manage the proposal files, set up and lead team meetings, and serve as the point of contact for the team and for external collaborators. The proposal team leader, project manager could be a PI, it could be a PA, or it could be someone from the fiscal team. That is a support that we are always happy to help provide, which might free up others on the team to focus on writing their components. But we always recommend to really clearly identify one person in this role so that we can ensure that those timelines and all of the requirements are met. So the Smartsheet proposal form also asks about which complex components are applicable to your proposal. This just helps us plan adequate support and make sure that we have the appropriate timelines in place. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so moving on to the next step, once you've identified an opportunity and completed that Smartsheet form we just talked about, the next step in the pre-award process is to meet with the proposal team to assign roles, delegate tasks, and build a timeline for all the reasons we just talked about. Meeting during the pre-award phase also allows us to align the vision for the project with reality should it be funded. So this saves some time once the award is received because we've already thought out the practical logistics and implications of the work. So implementation is quicker. This is another great reason to include a Cayenne Fiscal team member on your team early on. That's because they have a lot of knowledge about university processes and systems, and they can help you align your vision with reality and try to identify where implementation might be challenging and work through some of those issues early on in the process. Next slide, please. Back to you, Sarah.
Yep. So next we're going to go into, the meat of the process, obviously, which is building out the proposal. And I've listed some items here that I understand are not the meat of the proposal, but are the things that we get a lot of questions on and have more expertise on. So I'm just going to go through these different items. So the first is the facilities and resources document. And that lists out where the work is being done and how the site is equipped to do the work. The document should both include our site as well as any subcontracts that we are working with that will be doing work on their campuses. So you don't need to start from scratch with this document. We do have an example that can be found on the Cayenne intranet site, and that's a great place to get started and just build off of that document to cater it to your specific project. Next is the data management and sharing plan. And this is a relatively new requirement from NIH since 2023. and it is required for research that generates scientific data. So that's going to be including R01s, some Ks, and most research center grants. It does not apply to training grants, fellowship grants, or conference grants. So the DMSP should address data management and sharing for your project and then respond to any specific expectations that are listed in the funding opportunity. And although we do not have a sample posted on the Cayenne intranet, we do have examples from previous submissions. And we find that sometimes it's hard to get started with this because it's kind of new. So that's somewhere you can reach out to us and we can help you with that template. And then sometimes confused with the DMSP is the resource sharing plan, and that is not always required. So that will be specifically mentioned in the funding opportunity, and if it is required. And that's going to be for any sharing that's not data resources. So maybe software sharing is an example. And both of these documents, it can be hard to figure out like where to upload them. So we can help you with that as well. It's not always clear where or how they're necessary. Next is the other supports, and we've gone into those in detail in another training, but just wanted to mention again, these are needed for all key personnel for both our team and subcontracts. And we have the new process on Science CV that does make this a lot less strenuous, I guess, makes it a lot easier to collect those other supports, in my opinion. Um, so those do take quite a bit of time. So we always recommend getting started early with the other supports because they're just a little tedious. And then next is the budget and the subcontracts, and I'm going to go into more of a deeper dive in those. Um, that is a that I checked that, Angela, that it's just the other supports are just in the JIT, but we collected them for the CDTR.
I think we have to submit them for the RPPR, but we don't submit them as part of the grant. We submit biosketches as part of the grant, but I didn't think we submitted other support as part of the grant. I thought that always came later after they knew they were going to fund you and they want to make sure you actually have the time you say you have.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think when I checked for CDTR, yeah, I confused it because we did the RPPR and the and the renewal at the same time.
At exactly the
Yeah, so
same time,
that's why.
right? So we will
Yeah.
forever be confused about it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, thank
thank you
you.
for that. Yeah.
Sure.
So the bio sketches are also on a science CV, so that's also relevant. Great. So then, yeah, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the budgets and quite a bit deeper into the budgets and subcontracts in a few slides. And then the next step of our process is routing the proposal. And so this is once your proposal is all put together, you've done all the different components, and it's time to submit it to OGC. So this is where we go back to the two different types of proposals that McKenna mentioned. The first being one that OGC submits to the sponsor. So this will be NIH, and anything that is using the ERA system as well, and where we are the parent recipient. And then the other is the where Cayenne submits to the sponsor. So that would be where we are the subcontractor, and or if it's a non-federal grant, like a foundation or a state. So then within the OGC submits, we have two different types of proposals. The first being a single project proposal, and this next being the multi-project proposal. So for the single project proposal, an example would be an R01. So these are simple enough to use InfoEd directly. And the university will call these system to system routings or S2S. And that's because the InfoEd system is working directly with the ERA Commons system. And you'll put in the grant opportunity number, and then InfoEd will prompt you for what is needed for the application. There's detailed step-by-step instructions in a PowerPoint listed on the Cayenne Internet site that I find very helpful for more like technical support because InfoEd can kind of be a little clunky to get used to. And then while you're routing your proposal, if you do run into any issues, there's an email here that is very helpful and they respond quickly, which is very necessary when you're in that last day routing a proposal. And then the next type is the multi-project proposal. So these are going to be more complex grants like the P grants or U54 center grants that have multiple components. And those are going to be too robust to do in InfoEd. So instead, we need to route them directly into NIH Assist. And I will let you know that I learned the hard way that InfoEd does let you route an entire multi-project proposal in it. So just make sure that you know from the start that you need to be using NIH Assist and not InfoEd directly for the full application. And then for these, what you're going to do is build out your full application, run those errors, make sure there aren't any errors showing up in NIH Assist, and then you'll create a manual routing in InfoEd, and that just alerts OGC that you're ready to submit a proposal and you need them to review it. So we still use InfoEd, but we don't use that system to system like we do with the single project proposal. And then over on the right, thinking about when Cayenne submits to the sponsor. So again, these non-federal or where we are the subcontractor. Then we use InfoEd, but it's a manual routing instead of the system-to-system routing. So this you would just upload the major components of your grant as documents into InfoEd, and then you'll do like the routing form, which I'll talk about in a second. Sometimes OGC might require screenshots of the portal that you need to use. And that's usually only if that like is how the budget is put into the application. But that we did recently learn that for these manual routings, we don't need to be entering in the budget section. We really just need to upload an Excel for OGC to review. So that should be a much simpler process than the other two routings. So then for all routings, what we'll do, which both McKenna and Aaron have mentioned, is that for the most part, the PI or the proposal project manager will be the one to route. Sometimes Cayenne Fiscal will be putting in the information in InfoEd. It really depends on how those roles are initially delineated during that planning phase. But someone will share the routing number with Cayenne Fiscal, usually through that form, and we will do a review within, we need 2 days to do the review, and then we'll be the ones to submit it to OGC. And then after we submit it, the PI does get a notification through the system that they need to approve before it goes on to the next step. And then OGC reviews it and might send us back revisions that Cayenne Fiscal and the PI and the rest of the team will work on fixing. And then either we will submit it to the sponsor or we'll send it back to OGC to submit. If OGC doesn't have any revisions, then they'll just go ahead and submit it right in that initial phase. So every routing includes a routing form, which is something which is really important to fill out correctly because it ties into post-award. So if the project is awarded, there's a lot of things that are set up based on that initial routing form that are pretty hard to change on the back end if we do that incorrectly to start. So that's a main thing that the Cayenne Fiscal team is reviewing when we review the proposal before submitting it. And there is a lot of information on how to fill out that form correctly on the Cayenne Internet site. So if you're not sure how to do it, definitely go there. And apart from the routing form, we are also taking a very close look at the budget to make sure that all the math and everything is right. And as McKenna mentioned, that routing number is started during this process and it's used throughout the life of the project, post-award as well. And we would like to be Kind Fiscal would like to be the main point of contact with OGC, but we understand that in some cases it makes sense for the PI to be in direct contact, but it just makes it easier to streamline communication and it helps with because we already have those relationships built up. And then generally, sometimes we get the question, do I need to route this? And it's only required if there's a budget within the proposal and if it's for new money. So something we recently learned is that if it's just a general, like a letter of intent for funding that then would lead to submitting a proposal, but there's no official budget, you do not need to route that through InfoEd or through OGC. We wouldn't need to do that until after we need to submit a budget. Or if it's a contract, like if it's a contract amendment for a new year, we don't need to, since we've already gotten that money, it's not new money, we don't need to reroute that through InfoEd. But we really do want to make sure when we're thinking about new money that, routing through OGC, InfoEd should be our first thought. So then our two deeper dives, as I said, are going to be the budgets, and then I'll talk about subcontracts. So Cayenne Fiscal is very happy to help significantly in developing budgets for proposals. And however, we do understand that, sometimes folks want to get started and kind of develop out their own budget for us to then review. And these are a lot of the questions that we get, or a lot of the things that we see throughout the process that I wanted to touch on. So the first is salaries, thinking about salary increases. So some of you might know that NIH many years ago issued a policy that they don't accept inflationary salary increases. But however, yeah, many departments have decided to continue to propose those increases, even though sometimes NIH doesn't award the increases in budgets. OGC has allowed us to continue doing that and let departments do that unless it's specifically mentioned in the funding announcement that it's not allowed. So within that, CU and OGC has kind of allowed us to do this in two different ways. The first is a 3% increase from year to year, which matches what we actually are projecting usually. And then the second is a 5% increase from the current salary to the first year of the project, and then to keep it flat across the 5 years. That's usually OGC's preference because it follows the rule. It doesn't show that we're increasing salaries, but it stays within CU policy. But at Cayenne, we do usually just do the 3% increase because it's most accurate, and we haven't gotten much pushback. Sometimes you do in the JIT phase, and that's fine, and then we adjust. But I just wanted to mention this specifically because sometimes when we're working with sponsors, with like other institutions who are the parent awardee, they will tell us that we can't do those salary increases, and we have to abide by that. And then the next within salaries is thinking about the NIH salary cap. We just need to make sure that we are following the cap that is listed by OGC. Sometimes other agencies will, alert us of an NIH salary cap change, and we need to wait until OGC announces that the university is following that new cap. And then if we have someone that is not 100% is not 100% FTE, we need to make sure that we are calibrating, like using the equivalent percent. So if someone's 60%, then we'll look at 60% of the salary cap to see if they're over the cap. And then thinking about administrative time on projects, we just need to make sure that there is an above standard level of support, so that there's significant administrative tasks like events, subcontracts, many reports that can justify time on the project. And that's something we can discuss and talk about if we think that is justifiable. And then fringe rates, just reminding everybody to use the pre-award set fringe rates that are based on the type of role and not the actual fringe rates per person. And just those change yearly and sometimes multi times a year. So just make sure when you're putting that in to search on OGC's site instead of using any numbers that might be saved on templates or in your files. Thinking about sensitive expenses, we've all seen this list at this point, so I won't read it. But similar to what Aaron was talking about, where we want to make sure our pre-award is matching our post-award. So if we know that sensitive expenses are necessary for our project, it's very helpful to include them as budget line items here. Makes it a lot easier to get them approved down the line if we do get funded. And they still need to be justified. You can't just like list all the sensitive expenses, but it's if you know they're going to be needed and they can't and they're necessary, then you should put them in your budget. And then partnerships and subs and subcontracts. Often the proposals in our unit have very unique partnerships with, clinics or other sites. And Aaron kind of touched on this, but just making sure that we discuss the right type of mechanism that we plan on using in the post-award stage so that we know how to implement these then, and that we can quickly get started and not have, a long build-up phase because we wrote something in the pre-award phase that might be hard to actually implement. And also understanding that the type of mechanism that we choose for partnerships does affect the indirects a lot, and that can be hard to change on the back end. So just making sure that we understand the indirect implications. And then a little bit more with our indirects, just making sure that we're using, if it's a federal project, that we're using the federal rates that are negotiated with the university. And thinking about on versus off campus rates, just if we're working more than 50% at a CU facility, we should be using the on-campus rate. And sometimes people ask if I'm remote and I'm working at home, does that mean I'm off campus? And that does not count into this calculation. You're still considered on campus because you're still using CU resources. And then if the sponsor is not federal and has a published, consistently applied policy, the university will follow that policy. But we want to make sure we catch that in the pre-award phase because sometimes we, create budgets that have indirect rates that we can't agree to on the post-award, and then we run into some major issues meeting that budget. And then thinking about the total, this is a new, announcement from NIH, so we wanted to make sure we touched on this, that NIH is no longer requiring prior approval for budgets that are over 500,000 in directs. And this is usually for us, it's specific to the R01 model. And we haven't gotten much guidance from the school about how, like, okay, well then how much should our budgets be? But we have discussed this with other units, and the general guidance is to still keep within the 500, close to the 500,000, but it's okay to go over as long as you can justify those additional funds. And then to use this as an opportunity to discuss with your PO if you're not sure, just to, get their opinion about going over that 500,000 and whether or not it's justifiable. So then next, thinking about subcontracts, a little bit of a deeper dive. Again, this is a part of this process that Cayenne Fiscal is happy to help with, especially because we often work with the same subcontracts across different projects. So often we've already been in communication with them on a different project. I've listed here the different documents that are required for subcontracts for a federal grant. And a lot of these are linked onto this list is also linked onto the internet, as well as examples and templates for some of these documents. So the first is the letter of intent. And subcontracts can use their own template or they can use CU's. We used to require a letter of collaboration. They no longer require that or allow it, so don't go asking for those. We're really focusing on that letter of intent. And then the budget, we do recommend that it's easiest to develop see our full budget and then to tell the subcontract how much they have to work to make their budget. But we do understand with smaller projects, it's often a more collaborative process of figuring out what is needed to get, for the total. And then the budget justification and the scope of work, pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I'll say is that it's helpful not to have total numbers on there, so then when we're putting together the proposal, we're not having to like constantly change those numbers, and it allows for less mistakes. Facilities and resources I've talked about, but we would collect the document from our subcontractors and then incorporate it into the full document. So we just submit one per proposal. And then bio sketches are for key personnel only. So we do need to collect those for all of our subcontractors. ERA Commons IDs I like to mention because they're required for key personnel, students, and postdocs. And we don't usually have a lot of students and postdocs, so we might forget about that. So just important to collect those from the subcontractors. And on the internet site, we do list our common collaborators. So those, if you start with that list, then we might already have collected their Commons ID for a previous submission. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of other documents that the subcontractors are working on as you develop the overall proposal. And then back to you, Erin.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. All right, so we've gotten a lot of information about each step. So now we just want to take a look at the timeline for the final stages of the proposal. So this slide provides general guidance about timelines for the proposal process, from when you identify your opportunity to when you're ready to submit for review. It's going to take about 3 months. Obviously, the timing can vary pretty significantly if a project is very complex and requires additional external reviews or has a lot of collaborators. It might take longer than one that's more straightforward and the proposal team is small and totally internal. So right now we're going to take a couple slides to have a close look at the timeline shown here in green from submission to review to submission to the sponsor. Next slide, please. So Sarah already shared details about the routing, so we're just going to look at the timing here. The first circumstance would be that OGC submits the proposal. And this is when Cayenne is the parent awardee or we're submitting for NIH or other federal funding. Minimally, you need to submit your proposal documents through that Smartsheet proposal form that we already talked about 14 business days prior to the submission deadline. As we've already discussed, we would very much, the Cayenne fiscal team would very much like to be involved earlier in the proposal process, but minimally it needs to come to us through that Smartsheet form 14 business days prior. Regardless of when Cayenne Fiscal gets involved in the proposal process, the fiscal team remains the liaison and primary point of contact between Cayenne and OGC in alignment with OGC's preferred workflow. Sarah touched on this already. Sometimes PIs need to talk directly with OGC, and that's completely fine, but Cayenne Fiscal remains the primary contact for moving that along in this submission process. Cayenne Fiscal reviews the proposal and submits to OGC at least 12 business days before the submission deadline. Very often, but not always, OGC will have some revisions and they'll send it back to us. And once the project team makes those revisions, Cayenne Fiscal then submits the revised proposal at least 4 business days before the submission deadline. And then OGC submits the proposal on our behalf. Next slide, please. So the other situation is when Cayenne submits to the sponsor. submits the proposal to the sponsor. This is when we, Cayenne, are the subsite or when we're submitting to non-federal entities, and you can see the timeline is much shorter. Minimally, you would want to submit your proposal documents through the Smartsheet proposal form 7 business days prior to the submission deadline. Cayenne Fiscal will review the proposal and submit it to OGC at least 5 business days before that submission deadline. OGC will send back their suggested revisions, and then Cayenne submits through the submission portal or by emailing the sponsor directly as directed in the funding opportunity. There's no additional review of the revisions needed by OGC, and Cayenne has a responsibility to submit in this circumstance. Okay, next slide. Hand it over to Lisa.
As mentioned previously, there are many resources, one of them being the Cayenne intranet. When you're on the Cayenne intranet, you'll go to the Fiscal and Grant Admin tab, and within that, you just scroll down to Grant Management and click on Pre-Award Resources. There you'll find NIH resources as well as OGC resources and guidelines for proposal components. OGC will assist with the routing in the proposal, and at OGC, Jessica Ostwald is our pre-award contact. And just note that ERA support helps immediately. Next slide, please. The goals for the future, as the Cayenne Fiscal team is building towards a more team-based approach, and along with the process that we've laid out in the previous slides, we have a few goals that will help make our grant portfolio more robust in the long run. So you see here on this slide, tracking the proposal submissions, using data to best understand best practices, increasing the rate of submissions, building out the toolkit with the help of the Strategic Planning Committee. This will help to make applying to grants easier, and of course the Cayenne Fiscal team is excited to help and make it more uniform. The admin team will grow our skill set in attending external trainings on pre-award to enhance support. We know this is our priority because we spent most of our time on post-award, and we recognize that there's that gap. Next slide. And the next Cayenne Coffee and Conversation will be June 3rd, where we roll out the Smartsheet, the switch from FormStack to Smartsheet. And that's it.
Thank you so much, everybody. Super helpful.
Thanks for joining. Does anyone have any